Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannon. Today I'm going to give you a review of Chapter 3 of my newest book, God and Our Superdeterministic Universe, the number one argument for the existence of God, which is available on Amazon Kindle. Chapter 3 is entitled The Downfall of the Copenhagen Interpretation. In physics, the theory of the subatomic or microscopic level is called quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is intrinsically indeterministic, and no truths can be attributed to an object except according to the results of the measurement. This is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. So, in quantum mechanics, the most prevalent interpretation involves something called the wave function, which is a mathematical entity that provides a probability distribution of the outcomes of each possible measurement of a system. So when you're measuring quantum systems, um, the outcome of the measurement is based on a probability distribution. In other words, it's a purely random outcome, but it is confined within a probability distribution. There are outcomes that are much more likely than other outcomes. Um, so, under the Copenhagen interpretation, physical reality comes into existence upon the collapse of the wave function. So the wave function is this mathematical equation, essentially, or description of the probability distribution. Uh, and the collapse of that wave function is when one of those possibilities comes into physical reality. So, um, physical reality comes into existence upon the collapse of the wave function at the time of observation or measurement, when only one of the various probabilities of the different potential outcomes becomes physically real. The wave function is a superposition of all possible states at once. And it's only when we observe its state that a quantum particle is essentially forced to choose one probability, and that's the state we observe. So, the Copenhagen interpretation is fundamentally claiming that physical reality at the quantum level comes into existence from this metaphysical, invisible, immaterial, mathematical, metaphysical reality of superimposed possibilities, which somehow collapses upon observation or measurement to create the one actual physical reality we see. But fundamentally, it's saying that physical reality is generated from nothingness or from an unreal quantum substratum. Atheists can use the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics as the premise for their number one argument against the existence of God. Why is this? Because if physical reality comes into existence purely randomly, then that is very poor evidence of the creation of physical reality by a supremely intelligent God. Rather, the creation of physical reality randomly, purely randomly, is great evidence of creation by a supremely unintelligent creator. And God is not unintelligent. Um, the problem is that because the universe began on a subatomic scale, people believe that the cause of the existence of the universe was a result of quantum mechanics or the physics of the subatomic. And because that physics is purely random, based on a random probability, well, based on a probability distribution, then that implies that the creation of the universe was purely random. And pure randomness is the opposite of intelligent. So the evidence seems to suggest that the creator of the universe was unintelligent. Well, that can't be God because God is intelligent. If a purely random process was responsible for the creation of physical reality, then our universe is a purely random outcome of that process. Because quantum mechanics describes a purely random process, then our universe and the existence of human beings was a purely random outcome. Darwinian evolution is based in part on purely random genetic mutations, which means that the existence of human beings was solely by chance and not by design. This is extremely problematic for Christians because the book of Genesis in the Bible says that God created human beings on purpose and by design. Um, so, the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is definitely the atheist's best argument for the non existence of God. And there's only one way to deal with this problem persuasively, and that is superdeterminism. So, if you think that um, if you think that purely random processes generated the universe and ultimately human beings, it's a much simpler assumption to make that the process of creation would be by an unintelligent creator than a supremely intelligent God who simply chose a purely random process of creation. Uh, so this so this is a big problem for Christians. Uh, how to deal with the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. And remember, quantum mechanics is the more fundamental physics than the macro level physics of relativity, because it deals with the smaller fundamental units of reality. So one could, by reductionism, claim that quantum mechanics, in terms of its explanations of reality, must be closer to the truth than relativity itself. So, you know, here's the problem. A Christian could always say, well, God used a purely random process to create reality. Um, but why is that a better explanation than that reality is simply purely random and not intelligent at all? Why bring a God into it? So that would be like saying, okay, this supremely intelligent God has a bunch of particles of matter and he's going to make something out of it. By analogy, it's my bag of confetti. But okay, but instead of taking these particles of matter and arranging it the way he wants to see it arranged, instead, this supremely intelligent God blindfolds himself or puts a bag over his head. And then he takes this bag of particles and confetti and he decides, you know what? I'm going to create things randomly. So I'm just going to Sprinkle them around. There we go. See what it looks like. Looks like a mess. That's what it looks like. So the problem is, why would God put a bag over his head and use a purely random process, which would result in purely random outcomes? Supremely intelligent God seems unlikely, even though he could actually do that. It seems unlikely that God would do that. It seems far more likely that the creation of reality is by a supremely unintelligent creator, not God. Okay, so how do you get out of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics? Now, the answer is superdeterminism. Why? Because Dr. Hansen proved that superdeterminism is the real nature of reality. And more importantly, that temporal causation or continuous causation in time is not real. That's absolutely key. That's the key point to understand in understanding how superdeterminism saves the theist argument from the Copenhagen interpretation. So, this atheistic argument fundamentally relies on the premise that the universe is created purely randomly, and that pure randomness is a result of the wave function. And the wave function is considered ontologically real, even though it's metaphysical, invisible, and material. Nevertheless, it is considered the true nature of reality. That is, reality is truly unreal until it's observed or measured. Well, if the wave function is creating physical reality, it can only do that if temporal causation is real, if continuous causation in physics is actually real. So, if continuous causation isn't real, then the wave function can't cause anything to happen. And because the wave function can't cause anything to happen, then why would you believe it was real? You shouldn't. You should only believe in things that actually cause something to make you believe they're real. So, under superdeterminism, Dr. Hansen's version of it, the wave function is disproven. It can't be real because temporal causation is not real. Rather, we live in a static block universe or block reality without temporal causation. Well, there's the downfall of the Copenhagen interpretation. If there's no temporal causation, then the Copenhagen interpretation has to be wrong. And any interpretation of quantum mechanics that is based on some sort of metaphysical, invisible quantum substratum that creates purely random processes also has to be real, also has to be false because the wave function can't be real or temporal causation is not real, as proven by Dr. Hansen. Now, the fact that temporal causation is not real allows us to create what I would call the superdeterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics. And this says that the measurement of observed behavior at the quantum level are predetermined. and may appear consistent with the predictions of a mathematical model, such as the wave function, but are not actually caused by any unreal mathematical entity due to the non existence of causation in time under superdeterminism. Um, so, the superdeterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics even explains the Legeck-Garg inequality violations seen in physical reality. The Legeck-Garg inequality is sort of the counterpart of Bell's inequalities, but it's a measurement of the same system at different times, as opposed to a measurement concerning non-locality. The LGI tests the correlation of a single system measured at different times. Uh, the LGI imposes a boundary on a theory satisfying properties of realism. That is, for example, the moon is there even if you don't see it. So, realism. So, even if you don't, so at the quantum mechanical level, the idea is if there's a particle but you're not measuring it, the particle is still actually there. Like the moon is still there even though you don't actually see it. That's the idea of realism. It's a real object even though it's not observed. However, there's been experimental confirmation of the LGI at the quantum level that have shown um, that give evidence to the idea that quantum reality is not realistic, but an unreal probability distribution. So there have been experiments which have shown an LGI violation, which suggests that the quantum level reality isn't real uh, until it's observed or measured, because the inequality is violated through the experimental data. But it's important to understand that under the superdeterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics, um, any data that's collected can simply be explained as predetermined data. That's the way the universe appears on the hyperplanes of space-time in the local area surrounding the experiment. So even though an LGI experiment will give you data, real data, which suggests that quantum reality isn't real, it's still real data. So the universe and the hyperplanes are giving you that real data. So under the superdeterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics, you can always say that that's just the way the local hyperplanes appear. That's the data it's giving you. It's not telling you the hyperplanes aren't real. It's just giving you that particular data, which is consistent with a violation of LGI, but it's wrong to interpret it as meaning that reality isn't real at the quantum level. The proper way to interpret it is that that's simply the reality that the hyperplanes of space-time, the abutting hyperplanes, give you. That's the appearance they're giving you. It's a predetermined appearance of, in this case, an unreal quantum substratum. But the quantum substratum, that is the hyperplanes of space-time, are real, locally real. So it's important to understand that the LGI is no problem for the existence of God and for realism, provided you understand that objects at the quantum level um, aren't what we typically think of objects as things in of themselves, that can move around and have this independent existence, but rather they're merely appearances on abutting hyperplanes of space-time that give the appearance of a independent object. But the reality is it's just an appearance. It's the hyperplanes of space-time that are real. And that's how you get out of the LGI inequality using superdeterminism. Okay, that's my summary of chapter 3. I hope you learned something. And the next stop is chapter 4 and the demise of eternal cosmic inflation. Take care, everyone.